And you're live.
Great. The Committee on House Administration will come to order. I'd like to note that a quorum is present, and good afternoon. I'd like to thank the members of the committee and our witnesses for joining us today. As we begin, I'd like to note that we're holding this hearing in compliance with the regulations for remote committee proceedings pursuant to House Resolution 8. Generally, we ask committee members and witnesses to keep their microphones muted when not speaking to limit background noise. Members will need to unmute themselves when seeking recognition or when recognized for their 5 minutes. Witnesses will also need to unmute themselves when recognized for their 5 minutes or when answering a question. Members and witnesses, please keep your cameras on at all times, even if you need to step away for a moment. Please do not leave the meeting or turn your camera off. I would also like to remind members that the regulations governing remote proceedings require that we cannot participate in more than one committee proceeding at the same time. At this time, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and have any written statements be made part of the record, and without objection, that is ordered. Since the 104th Congress, when the House adopted a biennial committee funding process, the House has been required to adopt a committee expense resolution which provides funding for House committees. The Committee on House Administration oversees this process on behalf of the House. Each committee is required to introduce a committee expense resolution and prepare a budget submission. We have received and are reviewing those budget submissions. We're hearing from chairs and ranking members of those committees who have asked to testify. We've also sought assurances from every committee that they will adhere to long-standing House practices to provide the minority with 1/3 of the committee budget provided to them, and we have received those assurances. An area of vital concern to the House as an institution is strong oversight capability. It is imperative that our committees rebuild this institutional capacity to conduct robust and effective oversight. To ensure that we accomplish that end, we will be focusing on committee requests with an eye towards strengthening the House's ability and constitutional responsibility to exercise effective oversight. Beginning with the 116th Congress, we have taken steps to recover from what I believe was inadequate funding provided by previous Congresses. Committees were provided with $276.1 million in the 112th Congress. This amount was slashed to $242 million for the 113th Congress. The 114th Congress saw a modest increase to $248.9. For the 115th Congress, committees were provided $266.3 million. Last year, in the last Congress, we provided $283.4 million. We're making progress, but more needs to be done. Providing our committees with sufficient resources to do their jobs for the American people is essential. This committee reserves the right at any time in the future to ask chairs and ranking members of any committee to come back to us and discuss how committee funds are being used or to resolve any disagreements between the majority and the minority. The committee funding process has traditionally been one of the most bipartisan and collaborative efforts that this committee undertakes. Almost every committee's chair and ranking member have jointly signed letters to our committee in support of their funding request for the 117th Congress. Today, we will hear from the Committee on the Judiciary regarding their request for the 117th Congress. And I would ask unanimous consent for the letters regarding committee budget requests from the chairs and ranking members of the committees be entered into the record. And without objection, that is so ordered. I'd now like to recognize our ranking member, Mr. Davis, for any comments he may want to make.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been looking forward to this hearing because I think this is one of our most important and impactful roles as a committee. This is about so much more than how much money each House committee should receive. It's really a reflection on our priorities and our responsibility as the legislative branch of the greatest and most powerful country in the world. Congress is the first branch of government. The Constitution very clearly and intentionally vests most federal power and authority in Congress. The House of Representatives is the body closest to the people and the work that we do here has a profound effect on the lives of everyday Americans. Committees are one of the major pillars of this institution. It's where so much of our critical work gets done. It's where Congress's oversight prerogative is exercised daily. So often we get bogged down in the minutia of how much money a particular committee receives or what percentage increase a certain committee is getting relative to other committees, and we lose sight of the bigger picture. We must make sure that both the chair and ranking members of all committees have the resources that they need to be able to do the job that they are tasked with. The process of funding committees should be done in a transparent and thoughtful way. As we work through the funding for committees over the next week, I think it's important that we have a greater context for the funding that we are providing. Over the past 2 years, we've increased the authorizations for office MRAs by over 10% on average. At the same time, we've seen impactful increases to the House CAO, House Sergeant at Arms, Capitol Police, and Architect of the Capitol, while funding for House committees accounts for only 11% of the entire budget for the House of Representatives. Madam Chair, we fund the House IG, which oversees roughly $260 million worth of spending in the House, at a similar level or higher than 9 House committees, who collectively are responsible for conducting oversight on hundreds of billions of dollars. While some committees have received increases recently, overall across the board, committee funding has been stagnant. At the same time, the work has only increased. We cannot continue to hamstring our committees who play such a vital role in this institution and our democracy. I recognize that we are the authorizers and not the appropriators, but to the extent we are able, we should do everything possible to meet the needs of our committees. Most committees were able to work together between the majority and minority to reach an agreement on the budget that they need to do the job that they've been tasked with. And my hope as we continue through this process is that we honor those requests. I continue to have concerns with some of the processes and priorities of our committee. My staff has received numerous complaints about the amount of time it is taking to get responses from this committee on everything from CMO requests to responses to letters and waiver requests. The Communication Standards Commission has not even been appointed and organized yet. The process for committee funding is being done at the last possible minute, with final passage needed next week to meet the deadline, and committees were given little time to submit their budgets and questionnaires. We have not held a single hearing on the issues of January 6th and the vulnerabilities of our Capitol complex. We did not hold a markup on an 800-page bill that we have primary jurisdiction over. The House has no plan in place to begin returning to normal operations now that more and more Americans are being vaccinated each day. Instead of tackling any of these vitally important responsibilities, the Democrat majority on this committee voted on Wednesday to proceed with its plan to overturn a state-certified congressional election. To say I disagree with that decision would be woefully insufficient. Congresswoman Miller Meeks is our colleague. She was elected by the people of Iowa as their representative to Congress. Not only did she not trail in any official count, the Congresswoman continued to lead following a bipartisan recount conducted in all 24 counties in that district and was unanimously certified the winner of the race by a bipartisan Iowa State canvassing board, just like the other three members from Iowa. In spite of this, the Democrat majority has dedicated itself to stealing this seat from the people of Iowa in order to improve its margin in this House, which is why I offered an amendment on Wednesday to dismiss this election contest. Yet, if we must hear this dubious contest, we must conduct ourselves in a manner befitting this House. Madam Chair, you declared just 2 days ago that you were committed to working with Republicans to develop a fair and open process to govern this contest. Not even an hour later, you turned right around and locked Republicans out of any meaningful opportunity to weigh in, rushing out a one-sided, heavy-handed edict designed to guarantee your desired partisan outcome. Your plan would set this committee's power to yours and Rita Hart's attorney, Mark Elias, as Democrat cronies in order to allow them to remove a democratically elected member of Congress. Republicans remain committed to engaging with Democrats to ensure that this process is open, transparent, and fair to the parties and the American people. The Democratic majority, on the other hand, is committed to ruling with an iron fist in order just to cling to power. We must get back to doing the important work of the committee that we are charged to do, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Since the matter before us is the funding of the Judiciary Committee, I will decline the opportunity to respond to the ranking member's erroneous comments at this time, but I will turn now to the members of the Judiciary Committee who have appeared today to testify about their budget. We do have the vice chair of the committee, Madeline Dean, who is appearing for the chairman who had a conflict that he was unable to change, along with the ranking member, Mr. Jordan. So each of you will be recognized for 5 minutes to make your presentation, and then we will have any questions that members may have. Ms. Dean, you may begin.
Chair Lofgren, Ranking Member Davis, members of the committee, I am pleased to appear before you today on behalf of Chairman Nadler to discuss the House Judiciary Committee's funding request for the 117th Congress. Mr. Nadler has asked me to apologize to the committee for his being unable to testify before you today due to pre-existing commitments. As you all know, the House Judiciary Committee has historically been one of the most active committees in the House. Our wide jurisdiction, ranging from antitrust, immigration, constitutional law, to issues related to criminal justice, civil rights, and the courts, places us at the forefront of many of the most pressing issues facing our country today. In fact, last Congress, 1,724 legislative measures were referred to our committee, representing roughly 15% of the bills in the House. The Judiciary Committee held 91 hearings and reported out 78 bills and resolutions to the House, and had primary jurisdictional involvement in the passage of 107 bills and resolutions. Despite a divided Congress and a Republican White House, we were able to work across the aisle and pass 45 judiciary bills into law. We expect to be even busier this Congress. We have already held 11 hearings, and 8 judiciary bills and resolutions have already passed the full House of Representatives. And we expect at least another 4 judiciary bills to be voted on next week. Many of our priority bills, including the Equality Act, policing reform, immigration reform, gun safety legislation, and violence against women legislation, are under our jurisdiction. Other critical issues like antitrust enforcement, voting rights, bankruptcy, arbitration, intellectual property, and civil rights and liberties are also under our jurisdiction. We expect to have a robust oversight hearing and markup schedule planned for the remainder of the year to tackle these and other issues. With that in mind, we are requesting a 10% increase in funding for 2021 and an additional 5% increase over that for 2022. Our committee staff went above and beyond the ordinary course last Congress in working to deliver for the people, but we need to hire and recruit additional highly trained staff in order to fulfill our legislative and oversight responsibilities. Due to the technical nature of the committee's work, most of the committee's vacancies will need to be filled by attorneys who have very specific legal knowledge and abilities. And we need to offer salaries that are competitive with similar positions in other areas of government and in the private sector. We also pay for numerous subscription and software services that are essential to our committee's functioning and our council's work. Our requested 2021 funding increase, as well as the committee's 2022 request, which reflects inflation and additional costs arising from follow-through on the work we will conduct in 2021. This will be critical to recruiting and hiring the staff we need and providing them with the resources they need to succeed. As in past years, after subtracting the amounts to cover administrative expenses and salaries of shared employees, we will allocate 2/3 of the remaining funds to the majority and 1/3 to the minority to cover salaries. We also plan to maintain 5 shared employees for such matters as IT and payroll, as was the case last Congress. With so many pressing issues before our country, this funding increase is critical to both the majority and the minority to allow us to continue to deliver results for the American people. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. I'm now pleased to recognize the ranking member, Mr. Jordan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ranking member, it's good to be with you. The full Judiciary Committee has yet to have a full committee hearing this Congress. 61 days in Congress, we've yet to mark up a bill, yet to have a full hearing, full committee hearing. The last couple of weeks, the Democrats in the majority have radically changed police law. They've radically changed election law. They've radically changed gun law, all pieces of legislation that should have come in front of the Judiciary Committee for hearings, for markup, for expert testimony. None of them did. Next week on the House floor are going to be immigration bills. Immigration bills that, again, are in our jurisdiction that are going to pass on the House floor or be on the House floor debate and possibly passage did not come in front of our committee. I mean, I find that amazing that we're gonna take to the floor immigration bills without going to the committee at a time when everyone in the country knows we have this crisis on the border. So much so that the Biden administration is looking to actually house migrant illegals in NASA facilities as we speak. We've had no hearing on the cancel culture phenomena. We've had no hearing on big tech silencing political views. We've had no hearing on conservatorships. We have 2 Democrats in Congress who have actually written to some of the network carriers, written to AT&T, and specifically asked that certain networks not be carried. I mean, we're the committee that's charged with protecting the Constitution, protecting the Bill of Rights, protecting the First Amendment and fundamental liberties, and we've yet to have a hearing on that subject. And of course, we just had the Democrats pass a $1.9 trillion spending package. 91% of it wasn't for COVID. A package that gave $1,400 to felons, a package that gave $1,400 a week to federal workers whose kids aren't in school, something my constituents don't get, something I assume most of your constituents don't get. And yet here we have the judiciary asking for more money. In the form that the majority sent to the House Administration Committee, Chairman Nadler said this: many of the Speaker's priorities fall under the jurisdiction of the Judiciary Committee. That's true. Ms. Dean just said that, including immigration reform, gun reform, police reform, women's rights, voting rights, equal rights, all true. But here's the thing. All those bills have passed already or they're going to pass next week. And yet the Judiciary Committee is asking for more money. We've yet to have oversight hearings. The chairman mentioned the importance of oversight. I agree. I'm on the oversight committee. We've yet to have an oversight hearing on the crisis on our border, something that the Judiciary Committee, I think, should be focused on. We should have had several hearings on this. We've yet to have one at the full committee. So when I think about the last year and what Americans have had to live through, what they've had to sacrifice with this virus that has impacted our country and impacted the world, it seems to me the last thing we should be doing is increasing our budgets when the American people have had to tighten theirs. And with that, Madam Chair, I would yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now is the time when members of the committee may direct questions to the members. Traditionally, we don't ask tough questions of our colleagues as witnesses, but we may have questions about the budget. So, Mr. Davis, I would turn first to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Vice Chair Dean, Ranking Member Jordan, welcome to the House Administration Committee. I wish we were in person. I would love to be able to get to that point again very, very quickly. I did see Chairman Nadler was busy calling on Governor Cuomo to resign today, but my first question was going to be for him, but Vice Chair Dean, I'm going to give it to you. Detailees are a valuable resource to committees, and the number of detailees per committee may not exceed 10% of the committee staff ceiling. Your committee staff ceiling is 80, limiting the number of detailees to 8. It's been a longstanding practice that committee minorities are allocated 1/3 of the committee resources. Will you commit to providing the minority 1/3, which equates to 3 detailees in the 117th Congress?
I believe on behalf of the chair, I can commit to that. We have done that.
Great. Ranking Member Jordan, thank you for your opening statement, sir. Thank you for your comments. It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
Quick question for you. Is the minority able to use the funds set aside for administrative expenses as needed, or is there an internal approval process that you have to use with the majority to access those funds?
Yeah, great question, Mr. Ranking Member. It's both. Some things we can spend on our own. Some things we have to ask permission for. For our for where our staff may, for example, on certain trips, we've been to the border as an example. So it just depends on what specific issue we're focused on, or appeal hearing, or what have you. So it's a combination for our 21 staff members.
Great. Madam Chair, can I ask you to remind members when not asking questions?
That's a very good suggestion, Mr. Davis. People will please mute when they are not speaking.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quick question for Vice Chair Dean. You mentioned in your opening statements that members of the House and staff members on your committee aren't able to compete with private sector salaries. I believe that's due to the Speaker's pay order. Are you and is the chair on record as wanting to raise the Speaker's pay order?
Not what I'm here testifying to. What I am here is to say we need to be able to recruit and train the very best. And because of the highly technical nature of the work of this committee, we have to hire the very best professionals, mostly lawyers. So we need the resources to do the job, as your opening statement said, to do the job well. That's why we're here.
Well, we clearly do need resources, but we need to make sure those resources are being spent wisely by each committee. I respect Mr. Jordan's opinion that many of the issues that Mr. Nadler, that Chairman Nadler discusses in his request are already going to be dealt with. I certainly hope that we might be able to get an addendum at some point of the additional measures that he hopes that the Judiciary Committee might take up, so that we can understand too as we move forward with budgetary requests. Ranking Member Jordan, is there any issues that you would like to bring up that you didn't get a chance to bring up in your opening statement?
No, I would maybe just this. I think the gentleman, the chair referenced oversight. Last year this committee was focused on some of the most intense oversight ever. Only happened a handful of times in our nation's history, and that was impeachment of a sitting president. And they went out and hired outside counsel for the committee, and they did all that on the budget we're currently under, not this budget that asked for over $1 million more this Congress. So if we're going to do real oversight, well, I'd like to see it. They did what they would call oversight last year with the impeachment proceedings, and they did it on the existing budget. Now they're asking for $1 million more at a time when the entire country has had to tighten their belt, as I said earlier. So again, for that reason, plus the fact that you would think typically the committee that's busiest in Congress is the Judiciary Committee. Frankly, as evidenced by the number of pieces of legislation that have already passed that have jurisdiction that we have jurisdiction of in the Congress, but we've yet to have a full committee hearing. Yet to have a full committee hearing with all these concerns going on about the First Amendment. I just find that remarkable, and the main reason why I think this increase is unwarranted.
Quick question. Yeah. My remaining time, Mr. Jordan. With the outside counsel that's hired on the Judiciary Committee, are you in the minority aware of those itemized expenses when they are reimbursed by the majority?
I'm sure we could get that. I don't have that information in front of me now, but I can talk to our staff director and we can get that information.
Great. Thank you. I yield back.
Lynn's time has expired. Mr. Raskin, if you have questions, you would be recognized now.
I have no questions at this time, Madam Chair.
Okay. We'll turn then to Mr. Loudermilk. If you have questions.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the ability to be here today. And this is one of the more interesting aspects and one of the important things that we do. I just want to say on the outset that I understand having disagreements when it comes to funding levels for committees, and I think the concerns that Mr. Jordan raises are worth considering. And I do appreciate him coming to take a stand on spending levels, because sooner or later we have to address the amount of money we're spending. I mean, by evidence of the bill that just passed this past week, it seems like Congress hasn't taken serious the level of debt that we are going into this nation. We're going to have to address that, and we need to show leadership by being able to be fiscally responsible ourselves in our own manners and our own ways of doing business. So, Ranking Member Jordan, The budget request states that the administrative expenses and 5 shared staff slots and salaries are subtracted from the committee's budget, and the minority is allocated 1/3 of the remaining funds and staff slots. Are the staff slots allocated sufficient for the needs of you and the minority staff?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're I think allocated up to overall 25 staff. We're at 21. We feel like we're doing the work of the American people with that. We're comfortable with that. We're comfortable with the budget we have. And when the Democrats on the previous budget did their impeachment proceedings, we had to function with the budget we have in arguing against that. And we did that. So we're comfortable with where we're at, and would like to just stay there.
Well, I mean, it could be that they're planning on doing another impeachment this year. We don't know. So, it could be that the funds are needed there. I have a feeling that won't happen, but anyhow. Last Congress, you expressed concerns that the requested budget increase for the committee is unnecessary. Would you mind going into more detail on why you feel that way this year, and why the funding levels are specific, or is there certain things that you think that we could eliminate?
Well, I would just say general, look, the American people have been told for the past year, you can't go to church, can't go to work, can't go to school, can't go to a loved one's funeral. They've had to sacrifice. And then small business owners have had to really sacrifice. Many of them have lost their business. And yet we're going to, at a time when we have a $25 trillion debt, we're going to increase the budget for the Judiciary Committee, a committee that is yet to have a full committee hearing in the entire 61 days now, over 2 months we've been in this Congress. Again, I just don't think that makes sense. It's just sort of a first glance, common sense. Regular Americans are going to say, wait a minute, I just don't see that. So I think that is our argument. And I think it, as I said, is just good common sense.
Well, and it's just not Judiciary Committee. A lot of our committees have not even had a full committee meeting. And so you wonder, what are we going to do throughout the year? And ironically, the budget was on the floor before a budget committee had even convened. So your point is well taken. Vice Chair Dean, your budget request states that your committee has 5 shared staff whose salaries are subtracted from the committee's overall budget allocation, and the remaining funds are split 2/3 for the majority and 1/3 for the minority. What do those 5 shared staff do for the committee?
It's my understanding, and this has been the practice last Congress and Congress's past. 3 are for IT, and others are for payroll, and they are shared. Literally, they have the responsibility for the budgetary process for both the majority and the minority. That's why I think this budget request is so reasonable. This is about not only our shared expenses and our shared or contractors, I guess they are, but also the important work of the committee. We've had a very serious mischaracterization of the work of this committee and the passage of bills. The bills that we have seen on the floor were very heavily vetted last year through hearings, through markups. So it's disingenuous to say that these bills just come to the floor miraculously without any measure of.
Can I just ask a question? So are all the same members on the committee the same members that were in the last Congress?
Of course not.
Okay. Well, I think that there's justification there. I think it's a valid point that the ranking member has been making. So just the last question.
Are you aware that we literally stepped out of a subcommittee hearing on immigration in order to be here with you today?
Well, you may not be able to answer this, but is there a plan on having a full committee or markup in the near future?
I'm certain there is, and I don't have that calendar date in front of me.
Okay, thank you. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Gentlemen's time has expired. Mr. Butterfield, if you would like to ask questions, you would be recognized now.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And let me say good afternoon to all of you, and hello from sunny Wilson, North Carolina, 76 degrees down south. It's good to see all of you. I'm sorry we have to convene on a Friday afternoon, such a beautiful Friday afternoon. But thank you for pulling us together. But I don't thank you for making me put on a necktie this afternoon. I had not planned to do this, but my staff told me that committee rules require a necktie when we have committee meetings, and so here I am. But let me just ask a question, if I can, Madam Chair. Are we Are we to expect other disputes, other funding level disputes from the other committees, or is this the only one that we are having to review?
If the gentleman would yield, this is the only committee where the chair and ranking member did not agree and submit a joint request.
And how many standing committees do we have now? Is it 20, 21 standing committees?
Let's see.
I believe it's about 21.
Well, and then
Not the select committees, just the standing committees.
well, but we also got requests from the Select Committee on Climate Crisis, Committee on Modernization, and the Committee on Economic Disparity, along with Ag, Armed Services, Budget, Ed and Labor, Energy and Commerce, Ethics, Financial Services, Foreign Affairs, Homeland Security, Judiciary, Natural Resources, Oversight and Reform, Rules, Science, Space and Technology, Small Business, Transportation Infrastructure, Veterans Affairs, Ways and Means, and this committee is consulting with the minority so that we can do our joint request.
Well, I certainly believe and understand that the minority has a right to bring this controversy to our committee, but I'm very disappointed that they could not work out their differences. Thank you so much for the hearing, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Stile, if you have questions, you would be recognized now.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I appreciate having Representative Dean, who's a co-lead on a human trafficking bill with me, as well as Ranking Member Jordan. Always good to see a University of Wisconsin Badger alumni. And it was nice I didn't wear a jacket. I did wear a necktie in your honor, knowing that I shouldn't have to wear a jacket if I don't have to, as you've taught us all. I'd like to dive in. $1 million is a lot of money. It's an increase in the budget. That's pretty significant. Judiciary ran a robust, how about that for a phrasing of the word, oversight process over the last 2 years. So I would assume an increase in the budget would align with another pretty aggressive and robust oversight again. If I can ask you, Ms. Dean, how many oversight letters have been sent to the Biden administration to date this Congress?
I don't have that information in front of me. And I do want to respond to one quick thing Mr. Butterfield raised. We have wanted to work in coordination with the minority and ask for their...
Representative Dean, I apologize. I only got my 5 minutes, so I'll see if one of your colleagues on your side will yield you some time here. But I appreciate it. I would love to get that information because I think it's important. And maybe Ranking Member Jordan, you may know, but I know there was a lot of letters that went out to the Trump administration, really taking up time and effort from them getting on with the work of the American people. I'd love to know how robust the oversight has been by the majority side. This Congress, I don't know if you know how many letters have been sent, Mr. Jordan.
I don't know, but maybe could hazard a guess. They may have sent more letters to the Trump organization than they have to the Biden administration, even though we have seen this crisis on the border, even though we have all kinds of schools that aren't open, all kinds of issues that frankly deserve oversight. I don't know that they've sent any. And I would point out, Mr. Stile, that 8 different bills have either passed or are scheduled to pass next week.
So I'd like
okay.
I got a question because you're heading where I want to head, because I've been listening to this dialogue in House administration, which has primary jurisdiction over HR1. We had kind of one piddly hearing. We weren't allowed a markup. I wasn't able to offer any amendments. I was not on this committee last Congress. I was on financial services, which I retain this Congress as well. But I didn't have the ability to offer some good thoughts and experiences that we learned here in the great state of Wisconsin on how to make our elections more secure, enhance people's confidence in those elections. We didn't have that. So maybe we saved a lot of money at the staff level on House administration. So I'm going to look to you guys. So I'm guessing if we're going to up it by $1 million, and we've seen HR1, which you guys have some jurisdiction over as well as the Equality Act, police reform. We saw gun restrictions get passed in the House last week. We got VAWA, we got immigration coming. So I got to imagine with another $1 million and new people on the committee, you guys have got to be going gangbusters in committee hearings left and right at the full committee. How many committee markups have you had on all these bills, Ranking Jordan?
No, great question. You've hit the nail on the head. Look, I think the fundamental question is, do we believe in the committee process? Do we actually think that works? The give and take, the expert witnesses, the back and forth, the ability to offer amendments as you would have liked to have done to HR1. That has all been bypassed. And as you rightly point out, we have had 8 different pieces of legislation that have already passed or are going to pass next week. HR 1, the Police Reform Bill, the Equality Act, 2 gun bills, VAWA, and 2 immigration bills scheduled next week. All have jurisdiction. We have jurisdiction over in our committee. None of them came in our committee. No amendments that we could offer. We got 11 new members on the committee, not to mention the 60 new members in the United States Congress. So even though some of these bills may have went through last Congress, they were changed, and the new people didn't get a chance to weigh in and represent the 750,000 people. They get the privilege of serving in their district. Frankly, neither did you under HR 1.
And we're not able to learn from some of our previous mistakes.
Right.
I mean, we saw a lot change over the course of the last 2 years with the coronavirus. I mean, we think back 1 year, life was pretty different. 2 years ago, before the word coronavirus was even in our vocabulary, we're not even really learning from that. I would think, by the way the Judiciary Committee is currently being operated as you described, there'd be a lot of cost savings by not having any of these markups. To the best of my knowledge, I'd love to see if there's been oversight letters sent to the Biden administration yet. Seems like a cost savings. And so to see the request come in for $1 million, it seems pretty rich. I know we just passed a $1.9 trillion, I'm going to put coronavirus in quotes, bill this week. So money seems like it grows on trees maybe to some folks. But I would like to see us really tighten our belt. I'd love to get an answer to the question on the number of oversight letters sent to the Biden administration. And I really appreciate your time, Representative Dean and Ranking Member Jordan. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Aguilar, if you have questions, you would now be recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate our colleagues joining us. I remember Mr. Jordan coming before the committee. I think it was on behalf of another committee previously raising his concerns and objections. Ms. Dean, Vice Chair Dean, you were commenting on a prior question from Mr. Butterfield. I wanted to give you an opportunity to respond.
Well, you know what? I know that the chair of this committee prizes working with the ranking member. And so when the budget proposal was shared with the ranking member, there was no conversation back. Instead, it was just, nope, no input, no discussion. Instead, it was, I'm just going to object. So that's an unfortunate thing that we have to take up the valuable time of your committee. I think it's important to talk about these issues. It's important to talk about these resources. And I also think it's important to say that it is appropriate to have worked and built on the work of the last Congress, which we used precious resources for. So I just think the ranking member, I just disagree respectfully with his characterization of many of the things he's just brought forward.
It would be nice if our colleagues could work this out, as you mentioned, but it's unfortunate if the ranking member doesn't feel that he can, respond in a way with the chairman.
I'll respond now.
Madam Chair, I'll yield back.
Ms. Scanlon, you are now recognized if you have questions for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I don't think I'll pursue any questions at this time because, like Ms. Dean and Mr. Raskin, I am also participating in Judiciary Subcommittee hearings to get legislation ready for the floor. So I'll yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Ms. Lejeune Fernandez, you are now recognized for 5 minutes should you have questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And listening to the conversation today, what I'm struck with is that right now we're in a moment where government actually is working, right? The American Rescue Plan showed that government's working. Congress passed a bill, the president signed the bill, and local and state governments across the country welcomed the plan. So Congress now needs to turn its attention to the many different legislative needs of the American people. And our obligation to meet our constitutional role. We need to exercise our constitutional power. Representative Dean, Vice Chair, laid out the heavy workload. And our ranking member Davis, when he was addressing the actual matter before us today, recognized the importance of the committee's work in representing the people's business and made this comment with which I can agree. We cannot hamstring our committees. So, we've heard the broad jurisdiction of the committee. And I would just ask Vice Chairwoman Dean, are there any other responses you have for us today or any initiatives and plans that the committee has to help Americans that you'd like to highlight?
Well, it's my delight to work with you, Congresswoman. And I really like that you took the time to pause and to recognize what we've done. Government working for the people, the American Rescue Plan. I was a member of the State House and sat on the Appropriations Committee there. And I used to say that how we budget is how we define ourselves. That American Rescue Plan puts broad dollars and it defines us well, and it will be an engine for our economy. I would like to go back, and I thank you for this opportunity, to just put the funding request in some context. Over the last 20 years, and the chairwoman recognized some of this, the budget has been reduced when you take into account inflation and direct cuts. And more bills are referred to our committee. In addition, the cost of hiring and retaining staff, especially attorneys, as I've discussed, with specific legal expertise and digital staff with design skills, continues to increase. I think that the minority ranking member would recognize we've had staff working round the clock, and I honor them for that, for the robust work that we had to do last Congress, and we will continue to do this Congress. But I don't believe that is sustainable. So we need to staff up. We need to staff up with quality people so that we don't have to turn down requests for legal aid or other subcommittee work because we simply don't have the funds. It's just too important, the work that is before us and before this Congress. And so with that, I just respectfully ask for the consideration of the 10% increase for this year and the 5% beyond that.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you. I yield back.
Jesse yields back. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for my questions. I would just like to note that we adopted a rule at the beginning of this Congress that permits bills that passed in the last Congress to be brought to the floor for consideration without additional hearings and markups by the committees of jurisdiction. I understand that the minority objects to that and may have voted against the rules package, but that is, this committee, along with other committees, have actually just followed what the rules permit. I'm going to ask, I don't think, Ms. Dean, that you would know the answer to this question. I wouldn't know the answer to it, but I was intrigued by the answer to the written questions that the committee asked, what additional tools might be available to reduce costs and add value to committee operations. And the answer provided was if it was possible to offer all employees access to LexisNexis and Westlaw and to provide for other subscription services, that it would reduce the cost to the committee. And you mentioned also the Adobe suites and certain other software applications. I want to pursue this further with the committee staff because oftentimes if the House acquires these programs in bulk, we can actually reduce the cost and make it available to a broader variety of committees. Certainly the Judiciary Committee is not the only committee that could use LexisNexis, and even offices could benefit from that if we're able to get a discount by buying a bulk rate. So I'm hoping to pursue that with the committee, in addition to carefully considering the testimony today of both yourself, the vice chair, and the ranking member, Mr. Jordan. We do appreciate both of you appearing before us. We have gone through each member of this committee to ask our questions. I would note that the ranking member's comparison of the budget provided to the IG of the House that oversees a small portion of the federal budget doesn't compare favorably to the budgets provided to all the other committees that has to oversee the entire rest of the federal budget. So that was a good point that he made and something we need to keep in mind as we examine these budget requests. With that, we have already asked unanimous consent and received the capacity for members, including the 2 witnesses, to provide any additional information in writing that they wish. And therefore, since there is no further business before the committee today, without objection, the Committee on House Administration will be adjourned.
Thank you, Madam
Thank you
Chair.
very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.